Hello, everyone. This is the 180th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I interview Mr. Maurice Thelen as we discuss Dutch side Roda JC Kerkrade's historic 1994-95 season. Mr. Thelen is the co founder of an official Roda Supporters Association since 1998. He has been an active writer and editor of the Voice of Kaalhei, the fanzine, between 1997 and 2006, and currently is the co host of the fan podcast on Roda and fan culture called The Voice of Kaalhei. Welcome, Morris.
Welcome. Good to be here. Great to be here.
Can you introduce yourself and your trajectory into football?
Of course, and I think it's quite a traditional story, Sean. When I was like 8 years old, my father took me to the stadium of our local team. We live like 5 kilometers from the stadium near Kerkrade, and that's when I saw my first game. In the I think it was 9 years old, not 8 years old, 9 years old, in the '88 season. And then I was sold. Actually, I think from then on, I went off more often to the stadium than my father did, and I grew into a quite a dedicated fan through good times and bad times. And as you already mentioned, quite active in the whole fan scene. Now dad of three boys, of which the two oldest one of 11 and 16 are season ticket holders, of course, since a couple of years. The youngest one isn't yet. He's a little bit too young yet, but that will come. Since then, I've been following the team, but also traveling with them nationally, especially in the period where we're going to talk about that's when I started, when I was around 17 years old. But then also following them internationally throughout Europe. I had the honor and pleasure to be there in that time. Unfortunately, my sons are not seeing that at the moment. But yeah, I think I've been living through the biggest successes of Roda so far, which is great, of course, which gives great stories. That's also why I'm doing a podcast myself, talking about the good old times with people instead of only about Roda being in currently the first division in the Netherlands. Yeah, so that's it in short.
Can you summarize the history of the Dutch club Roda JC Kerkrade and its status in the Dutch football landscape as we come to the decade of the 1990s?
We promoted into the Dutch Eredivisie, the highest league, let's say the Dutch Premier League in '73. Before that, Roda basically was a club which was due to a merger. So in the early '50s, we had multiple teams here in the Kerkrade area. So one of them was Rapid, the other one was Bleierheide, Juliana, and they all merged into to two teams. In the '54 time frame, they merged into Rapid JC, which is Rapid JC, and the other two teams merged into Roda Sport, and both of them merged into Roda JC in 1962. Roda JC stands then for Roda Juliana Combinatie, Juliana Combination. Good to know, I think, in '56, the Rapid JC side became Dutch champion, which obviously is the only championship we we can take pride in. 1962 period, we went into the Dutch first division and then only promoted to the Dutch Eredivisie, the highest league, in '73. And from that period on, we were quite a stable factor. Reached the Dutch Cup final in '76, and basically we're playing between, let's say, the sixth and the 10th position in the league on a yearly basis. Sometimes a little bit higher, sometimes lower. Most of the, but never really in danger in those years. And in the '80s, reached the cup final again, lost against PSV Eindhoven in '88, the year that they also won the European Cup, and then played instead of them because they went into the Europa Cup, won. So that's currently the Champions League. We went into the Cup Winners' Cup that year because obviously PSV won the European Cup. We were always kind of fighting for qualifying for the European tournaments. But as you might know, the Dutch league only was granted one or two positions at the time. So you had the champion, you had the cup winner who went into the Cup Winners' Cup, and then you had one or two positions for the UEFA Cup at that time. So that wasn't easy. We only achieved the European Cup and for the Cup Winners in '88. But still, we're always a stable factor, always fighting with the likes of, for example, FC Twente for those places around fourth, fifth, sixth. And that's also how we went into the '90s, although actually we went a little bit down at that time. We had a very unexperienced coach in the early '90s with Adrie Koster. The team also lost some experience and some players getting really old. So we weren't doing well in the '91, '92, '93 season. Actually, even in the 92-93 season, we had to fight against relegation, which we'll get to, I think. But overall, I think Roda had, and when we started the 94-95 season, we were a well-known Eredivisie side, stable. That's kind of the image we had at the time.
This story starts with the appointment of Hoop Stevens as manager midway through the 1992-93 season. Can you discuss his trajectory as a player and manager up to this point?
Stevens originated actually from a town close by, like 25 kilometers from here, Sittard, which are in football terms our rivals. Grew up as a son in a normal working class family. Dad was a hard worker, passed away in a very early age, which gave him some troubles. He started to play for Fortuna, so our rival team in Sittard, and then in '75 moved to PSV Eindhoven, where he immediately was part of their first side, of course. It was very successful there between, I think, 75 and 86, that kind of period. Won the championship with PSV, won the UEFA Cup in 78. And then after his active career and into coaching, I basically did youth teams at PSV until Roda asked him to join the side in 93 indeed. So he was a very young, unexperienced coach when he started here. Maybe good to mention, he was a defender, a very tough defender. And yeah, later on, you also see in his character the way he approached the team and his philosophy. It's very down to earth, a straightforward guy. Could be very tough, but also very good for his team.
What was the backbone of the team that Stevens inherited?
We came from a strange period, quite successful late 80s, with some young talents from our own youth academy. In addition, some guys around that. We saw some people leave in the 92-93 period. Jan Hansen, which was our captain, he left, was towards the end of his career, and he left to Japan to earn some money. We lost Michel Boerenbach, who made his next step in his career. So René Hofman, also towards the end of his career, but a very well-known winger at the time. We lost quite some experience in that season. So Stevens took over a team with still some of the young talents, the local talents which we had, in combination with for example, Erik van der Leur, who was our midfielder, very gifted, talented midfielder. But we didn't really have a lot of character in the team. Also with the new additions to that side in 93, bought a striker, Peter Hofstede. David Nascimento joined as a central defender. But when we had some talents like Tijani Babangida, who joined very young. But like I said, I mean, it wasn't really there was some potential in there, but it wasn't a team yet, and wasn't a lot of leadership in that team yet. And that in combination with a coach who later on had quite an impressive trajectory, Adrie Koster, but at the time was very unexperienced, and I think wasn't able to deal with the situation at hand at the time. So that's why we were struggling throughout the year.
While he came too late in the season to make a significant impact during the 1992-93 season, he would make a number of significant signings for the 1993-94 season that led to an improvement. They finished sixth for the 1993-94 season. Can you discuss this season and how it set the foundations for the 1994-95 season?
I think he did come in time in the 92-93 season because he kind of saved us from relegating. I'm quite convinced he did. Although if you look at the results in that period, in March, we still lost a couple of games. But then we started to be more stable and had a couple of good draws and some very important wins. So Roda won against PSV, and that was only in May. That was kind of the decider for us to stay in. But obviously very important to set the foundation and prepare for the year to come. Again, with quite some people leaving at the time, but also with some significant signings indeed. And again, coming back to what I said earlier, we had some local guys like Kari Zende, Mark Luipers, both defenders, right and left back. We had Erik van der Leur. We had some of the signings of 92-93 period, but we added a couple of great ones to that. Barry van Galen, nobody ever heard of him. He was an absolutely gifted midfielder, a little bit crazy, very impulsive, but very gifted. Marco van Hoogdalen from RKC, also a young guy, a central defender, defending midfielder. Dirk Derks, a striker. Arno Dominik came also, again, relatively young guy, central midfielder, defending midfielder. Those already brought some I would say, character into the team and some stability, and also some of the creativity with Barry van Galen. I think that's also why that was quite a successful season, coming from those early 90 years where we were fighting against relegation in like 2 years. So overall, the 93-94 season was successful for us. I mean, you saw a different kind of play. Oda started to create a system in which they played 4-3-3, but with pressing, one-to-one defending, quite aggressive. You saw that Stevens wanted to pose that on the team, and the club started to act like one organization, and that is definitely due to how Stevens worked. Again, as I said, he was tough, he was demanding. Obviously, Roda was not a big side. I mean, we never had a big budget. If you think about it, we ended sixth that year. Roda always had like between the 10th and 12th budget in the league. So we had to be creative with bringing in young talented players, which wasn't only due to Stevens. We had one of the guys who was involved was Noel Hendricks. He was an investor in the 80s. He started to put money into Roda to kind of save the club. But he didn't only put money into the club. He was able to cite talent. He was visiting tens of games throughout the week in Belgium, seeing all kind of young teams, lower league teams, and together with some of the scouting people, he managed to find these young talents all the time with the idea of buying them or getting them for free and then later on selling them. That was kind of our model at the time. So I think the combination of the two worked well. He kind of provided the money, but also some of the insights on those leagues around us to find that talent. And then Stevens was able to build that organization. He made everyone important, from the cleaning lady up until the guy who would manage the materials, and obviously the players, the ones playing, the younger ones, the older ones. He was building that team, and I think that's what he mainly did in 93, 94.
I believe Tijani Babangida, the Nigerian striker, was also signed around this time.
Yeah, he was signed, I think, a year earlier, if I'm correct. And that is exactly one of the examples of what Noel Hendricks did. So he had a huge network. Yeah, he went also to all those tournaments where these kind of players were playing. And actually, Tijani Babangida played in a youth tournament around the area here where the Nigerian national team was playing. And he signed him. He went on loan because he was very young to Venlo, a first division side. And then in the 93-94 season, he brought him into Roda. Obviously, eventually, Tijani Babangida, amongst others, won the Olympics with the Nigerian team. I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago because he's residing again in the area after a very tragic traffic accident, which cost the life of his little son and his brother, and in which his wife was seriously injured. The 94-95 team actually managed to bring him back to the Netherlands to help him and his wife to recover, which is kind of symbolic for how that team is still acting at the moment. They're still very active amongst each other. Everybody recognizes that this has been the biggest team ever for Roda. So they managed to help him, and great to see that.
Let's take a closer look at that 1994-95 season and the transfer activity ahead of this season and your impressions at the time.
Yeah, so looking at the transfers, where we brought in quite some talents in the 93-94 season with, like, for example, Van Galen, bringing Babangida back, Van Hooydonk, Dominic. They all stayed and they were part of that base for the 94-95 season, together with the ones I mentioned, Mark Luipers, Gerry Zende, Erik van der Leur. But we still missed some experience and some character in that team. And I think that's exactly what happened in the 94-95 season when the likes of Stevens and also Noel Hendricks brought in Johan de Kok from FC Utrecht, basically competing team for us always. Johan de Kok was, I think, one of the best transfers Roda ever made. It was a swap with David Nascimento, who we brought in 1 or 2 years earlier as a central defender. But Johan de Kok was not only a very good central defender, he was especially a very good leader in the team. He was strong. He was a strong leader. He was a great central defender. I think that was very important. We brought in Ruud Hasp, which was the goalie from, again, our rival in Sittard. Very decent goalie, but again, also a seasoned player who brought some experience and also was a very good leader in the team. And basically, Johan de Kok and Ruud Hasp were kind of well-known players in the Netherlands. Next to that, we brought in Raymond Atterveld, who had been everywhere, and then eventually came
Everton,
from Belgium.
Everton for like a year or so.
Everton as well, yeah, he been around, but he never really succeeded any of the places he'd been. But they saw in him, I think, again, quite some leadership capabilities. He was tough, but he had a good oversight. He had a great pass. My point was with mainly these three, we brought in quite some experience to the team, which already had quite some talent. And next to those three, Tomek Iwan came in, a Polish midfielder, right winger, competition for Babangida, obviously. And later on in the season, I think during the winter, we brought in Danny Hasp, which was basically Ruud brother as a left winger. Those were the transfers in that period, which kind of completed what we needed, especially when you look back, because some of the names obviously were well known, but others really were not. Were again those talents which I talked about. That's how we started the season. Not per se we were not going to fight for the championship up front. That was not the expectation, right? Like I mentioned before, in that period of time, there was only one or two UEFA Cup positions, and then you had still the Cup Winners' Cup league. That was about it. So you had 3 or 4 positions which qualified for playing in Europe, and I think that was the goal going into that season.
Now, ahead of the 1994-95 season,
Mm.
was there any indication that the team would do well?
Yeah, relatively well. And I mean, what we would expect, I say, I think the expectation was that the team would go and fight again for the places below the top three. And the traditional top three in the Netherlands is Ajax, PSV, and Feyenoord. And then there was a range of teams like FC Twente, Vitesse, Roda, Utrecht. Those were the kind of teams which were playing for those, say, four till six position and playing for the European tickets. For us, I mean, that was the expectation. And if up front someone would have said you'll get one of those European tickets at the end of the season, we'd be more than happy, or be at least fighting for that until the last couple of games. But being able to do what we eventually did and the way they did it, that was never the expectation. And that's typically because, I mean, we didn't have the budget. We had to be creative. So you also see the incoming names were not always the top names, which you thought, okay, that's what's bringing us into that competition with the top three teams.
For this 1994-95 season, Roda would make an impact in September when they tied Ajax, the great
Yeah,
Ajax of Louis van Gaal. About a month later, they defeated PSV Eindhoven 3-0. Was it at this point a statement of purpose that they were in for a fight?
yeah, especially the game against Ajax, which was the fourth game in the season. I remember that well because the first three we also had a draw, all of them 1-1. So we played 1-1 4 times in a row. Which was, to be honest, quite disappointing. At least those first three games, one home game and 2 away games, because even with the 2 point system, it already set you back quite a bit. But the game against Ajax showed the potential of the team. We put up a great game and a great fight against them. I read an article in the paper a couple of days ago, reread it, that Louis van Gaal already complimented us early in the season. He already saw what was happening. And I think hindsight, we saw that as well. And initially we didn't see it because we were still looking at those 4 draws, although the one against Ajax was quite okay, of course. But he already recognized this team is very tough. He of course, knew what kind of quality he had in his own team. And he also know that he was lucky with Ajax to get away with a 1-1. And he'd seen this great organized team with a lot of quality, a lot of power, very aggressive in a positive way, a lot of pressing, taking some risk, and having the quality also up front with Babangida, for example, and Max Huiberts on the left side. Also a left winger, which we brought in a couple of years earlier as a younger talent. They didn't have an easy game. Obviously, everybody knows the trajectory they had in that season. And early on in the season, that was already recognized. And we would repeat that performance in Amsterdam later in the year. So yes, Ajax was the first real indication in that season that we had a great side. And also after the Ajax game, a couple of wins followed. I think 4, 5, 6 wins. When I recall well, I'm counting now. I think it was 6 wins in a row and ending against PSV with the 3-0. Yeah, at that time everybody saw this is a team that's gonna and again we're going to fight for that European ticket again. Not we were still not thinking, at least not from a fan's perspective, but also I don't think the club was. We never pronounced that. We never thought that we're gonna really fight Ajax for the championship in any phase. And later on, we might have thought that for a short while, but here it was we were doing great to end in the top four.
But do you remember at what point during the season you felt that this would be a historic season?
I mean, I was a 17-year-old kid, 18 years old, and we obviously everybody saw that, especially towards the end of the '94 year, let's say December, that I mean, there was going to be the potential that this team finally would go into Europe again. And I have to go a little bit back into the 80s. Historically, Roda did well a lot in the first half of the season. And then somehow in January, February, we dropped in the league and we often missed qualifying for European football. So that was still somehow our fear, but it just didn't happen throughout January, February. I mean, we lost against PSV end of January, but then we were really close to Ajax at the time. At that time, we started to dream that this could really be something this year. But it was also difficult in terms of dreaming of a championship because Ajax was just going, they were crazy that year. They didn't lose a game. We were the only team they didn't win against. So that was going to be very, very difficult, of course. But I think in that period, let's say January, everybody thought this is going to be a historic year. Because also, I mean, even if we didn't play a great game, we still won. I mean, and we did it on character, not just on the individual qualities or the other way around sometimes. But it was just very convincing. The team went onto the pitch and you thought they're going to win. That was a feeling that we didn't know. We never had that.
In February 1995, there is a strike by Ajax players, and this paves the way for a number of Roda players to earn an international cap that they otherwise might not have. Can you discuss this situation?
Typically, the selection for the Dutch national team was made out of the players of the top three teams in the Netherlands. So that's Ajax, PSV, Feyenoord again, and players which would be playing abroad. The other teams weren't really considered, especially not us. We were Kerkrade is a town down south. We didn't have that much visibility, but the same applied for other teams like FC Twente or Utrecht, I think. So at that time, it kind of opened the door for and a necessity to look around. And obviously, with Roda making an impact that season, Johan de Kok, Ruud Hesp, Erik van der Leur, they were all selected for the Dutch team, which was great, which was really cool for us, which was also for us, it showed the world, it showed the Netherlands that we were there, that we were playing with the top teams there. So it was a recognition for the success and also made everybody proud, of course, at the club. At the other hand, if you look at it later on, unfortunate that it only lasted for at least for most of them for that one or two times that they played. Whereas I think the likes of Erik van der Leur, who was also a guy from here in the region, he would have definitely deserved to have had more chances in the Dutch team. So yes, it was positive. We never had so many people selected at the time, but unfortunately, it didn't last.
To put it in perspective, on February 22nd, the Dutch were to host Portugal at Eindhoven. But for this match, the Ajax contingent, we're talking about 8 players, including Van der Sar, Danny Blind, Frank de Boer,
Mm.
Davies, Overmars, you can name them all the stars. They said they had a heavy schedule, so they were not going to play this game. They took themselves out of this match. So this allowed the selection of the likes of Ruud Hesp, who'll be substitute goalkeeper for this match, and like you mentioned, Erik van der Leur, Johan de Cook to be selected for this match that the Dutch lost 1-0 at home. But nevertheless, at least some of them, Van der Leur and de Kock, earned international caps for this
Yeah,
match.
yeah.
Getting back to the season, what do you think was the catalyst for this 94-95 season?
I think it all fell together. Like I said, I mean, the philosophy of Noel Hendricks, the investor which we had, always looking for picking up talented players, often younger players, and that in combination, so a lot of creativity on that side with not a lot of budget. That in combination with a young coach, which we had before, but then a young coach who came into the position, the ideal position. He was able to make a team. He knew what he wanted very clearly. He knew what kind of characters he wanted, not just quality, but looking at characters that he wanted to build a team around. And obviously that fell together with the great scouting, some very talented guys, some very gifted players, but also some good leadership, some experience. The combination of things was just, I think, the recipe for the success we'd seen.
And of course, this is the historic Ajax side that would win the Champions League that season.
Very unfortunate for us because
With
I mean we've done the math over the years, and every year, almost every year, you would have become champion in that season. Unfortunately, not this year, with only losing 2 times, and not against Ajax. Obviously, that was the unfortunate part for us.
and like you said, most seasons it would either be Ajax, PSV, and Feyenoord would be occupying the first 3
Yeah,
positions. This season, Roda finished second behind Ajax, undefeated team of Ajax. They finished with 54 points, which in most seasons with 2 points for a win would have been enough to clinch the title. But obviously, they were playing against this super Ajax side. Who were the standout players for this season?
The nice thing about this season is everybody who's been there, who lived it, or who knows the Roda side of that time, I think you can still dream the team. With Ruud Hesp in goal, Gary Zende and Mark Luipers as backs. And then de Kok Atteveld, a central defender, a midfield with Huiberts, Van der Leur, Babangida or Iwan, Maurice Graaf as a central forward, Barry van Galen. They all brought their own quality and specifics into the team. But I think the standouts for the team were de Kok, Atteveld, Van der Leur, Van Galen, and then Babangida. And then obviously we had some players who did the heavy lifting, like Dominic and Van Galen. We brought in Maurice Graaf from the first division side, Venlo, who never scored too many goals, but obviously with wingers as Babangida and Mark Huiberts, he scored 18 goals in that season. So that was a perfect combination. Van der Leur, the local guy who was a central midfielder, but yeah, with a great spirit. He could read the game perfectly. He had a great kick. He took all corners and all free kicks. A very important player for us as well.
Let's underline the fact that in a 34 match season, Roda won 22 times that season, which is such a significant achievement. They lost only 2 matches. Like I said, some other seasons, this would have been enough to win the league title. Internationally, as far as Johan de Kock, he was the most beneficiary, and to some extent, maybe Ruud Hesp as backup goalkeeper. From the foreign players, the Polish midfielder Ivan, who would later join Feyenoord, I think.
Yeah.
He was beneficiary, as well as Babangida with Nigeria. Were there players that you feel were overlooked from the national team?
Yeah, for me, next to de Kok and Haas as Dutch players, I think Van der Leur was one of them for sure. And Barry van Galen was another one. Later on, I think when he played for us at Alkmaar, he was selected 1 or 2 times. I think it was also difficult because Ajax obviously in that period had a great team, which made it very difficult for players like Van der Leur and Van Galen to compete. But those were for me the two which would stand out and would have definitely deserved a chance there.
So we come to the following season, 1995-96. The team was not as impressive as the previous season. Despite a high finish, they finished fourth. In Europe, they reached the second round. They were eliminated by Benfica. But was there a feeling that the wheels were already coming off?
No, I don't think we had a feeling that the wheels were coming off because I think everybody accepted that achieving the second position in the Dutch league with this side, with this budget, is really extraordinary. That's not something we're going to repeat. It's not like we had the expectation we're going to fight for the championship, especially somehow it was maybe disappointing. We knew how it worked. We also knew, as I explained, in order to survive, Roda would need to sell players every year. So we would buy players or get players for free with the intention of selling them and developing them and selling them later on with a profit. And that's also what happened. So Tomek Iwan left to Feyenoord, Max Huiberts left to Borussia Mönchengladbach, German side, and some other transfers. Unfortunately, Ray Atteveld left as well. He only stayed with us for a year, and we got some players back for that, but not the quality that we had. But still a very decent side going into the 95-96 season. The general feeling was if we would have kept the team together completely, we would have been able to make a move to fight against Ajax. And now we just didn't have that quality. But still, I think everybody in the 95-96 season was very happy with what eventually was achieved. Especially because, we were finishing behind the top three, but that was great quality for us already.
The 1996-97 season was the beginning of the Bosman era. It was hard enough for the likes of Ajax and PSV to hold on to their best players, and it must have been significantly more difficult for a team like Roda. Was it inevitable that Roda could not maintain the same standards and the levels of 1994-95?
Yeah, maybe not directly, but eventually, definitely. And again, 94, 95, it's not like we threw around a lot of money. There was a lot of creativity in there, and especially the Cock transfer, I think, was still brilliant with just a swap with another central defender who wasn't as closely as good. I think eventually, after the 90s, it really had an impact for us because reading back again to the 94 season, 95 season, we offered 4 to 7 years contracts to players, knowing that if someone would come for them, they would have to pay a lot of money. That, of course, changed, like you said, with the Bosman. I wouldn't say it would have already impacted us in the 96, 97 season, but definitely later on. This changed the way the club had to work. Also, for example, the likes of Noel Hendricks, he stopped his activities because he couldn't do what he always did. It became much more difficult with the Bosman arrest to just put a contract there and earn a lot of money out of it. That whole dynamic changed, and that made it difficult for us.
So you have Tijani Babangida joining Ajax, Marco van Hoogdalem and Johan de Kock joined Schalke, and they would win the UEFA Cup with Schalke that season.
Actually, Roda played them, and after that game, things happened, right? Stevens eventually left during that season to Schalke and won the UEFA Cup. Johan de Kock already went there, and then Stevens took Van Hoogdalem along. That's typical for clubs like ours. If there is success before or after the Bosman arrest, that was always kind of our destiny that the best players would leave and make a step up. And obviously for us from a smaller perspective, but the likes of Ajax and PSV had the same, but then players would leave for clubs abroad. And I think we overcame that all the time. That was the strength of a side like Roda, to always be creative and always have a great scouting and the back, making sure there is a list of players which we could contract and others left. And obviously that a lot of times led to having great talents coming to join us, but not everybody was a success. Obviously, we also spent some money in those years, which was thrown out of the window, you could say.
As Hoop Stevens left his post on October 8, 1996, just a few weeks after being eliminated by Schalke in the UEFA Cup, was this seen as the actual end of the adventure?
Somehow it was because we were, I mean, if you look at the league in 96, 97, results started to get worse. We brought in another coach, Martin Jol, which had quite a name in Dutch football, but basically was training one of the big amateur sides, Scheveningen at that time. But as a player, he made a name. Completely different character. Also didn't stay that long. He wasn't too much involved in the details of the organization, I would say. He had a huge ego, and to the outside world, he looked very strong. But I think internally, there was quite some debate about how he was functioning. Still, like I said, Stevens was someone who managed the whole organization and who found it important that everybody in the organization was important and was made important and made sure that all the details were covered. Martin Jol didn't care about that. But eventually in that year, we achieved one of the biggest successes ever. It was the first time we won the Dutch Cup, so our first prize. And that kind of put the result in the league to the background and made it a very successful year, of course. But Martin Jol definitely wasn't, I wouldn't say it wasn't due to that success. Maybe for that cup streak it was, but his real quality showing in how we ended the league. He soon thereafter left as well. So yes, from a long-term performance in the league, that was deteriorating, and the cup made up for that for sure.
Was the cup win seen as a continuation of the 1994-95 adventure?
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you look back, and that's the feeling, and if you look at us as fans, but I think the general impression of the Roda side, I think we created our image in that period between 94 and let's say 2002, in which in 9 years' time or 8 years' time, we 7 times of those years qualified for European football, which was for a side like Roda, great achievement. I think that's kind of how people look at it, and with that big peak in '94, but definitely also with the two cup wins in '97 and 2000 as a result of that.
How is this 1994-95 adventure looked upon these days?
Yeah, for us at Roda itself, obviously as one of the biggest highlights, especially for those who've been there. I mean, the younger generation knows that we became second, but they can't comprehend how important that was, how big that was. I mean, they would see it as, oh, well, second, third, fourth, doesn't matter too much. They don't know which what performance it was for a team at that time. I mean, we were the first team in years to be able to fight between the top three. And later on, that was followed by some others. They were lucky that, for example, Willem II a couple of years after us ended second in the league, the Willem II Tilburg, and they also qualified for Champions League because we had two Champions League positions. Obviously, because of the success Ajax had, we weren't that lucky. Otherwise, that might have made a difference, right, for how people would look at it this time. But for us, I mean, for the people who've been there, we knew how extraordinary, how special that season had been. Like I said, it is still regarded as extremely special, and that group knows it as well. They still have a WhatsApp group with all the former players. Like I just said, they even helped Jali Babangida this year. They still have reunions where they come together. So within the club and around the club, it's regarded as a hugely successful year. I think the outside world mainly recognizes Roda for the period that it has had been at that time, with always playing for European football in that period. So unfortunately, I think if you look at it from a Dutch perspective, people would, I think, recognize the team, knew that they became second, but they wouldn't regard it as highly as they might have deserved based on the performance at the time and the points and the wins they had, just due to the fact that there was that Ajax kind of blew it away with their season.
The legend of this Ajax side of 1994-95 season, did that take away the headlines that this team perhaps deserved?
For a certain extent, for sure. Although I must say, looking back at it, Roda always was although we were like fighting for places between 4 and 8, we didn't get that much publicity in the Netherlands. We just weren't one of the big teams. And I must say, that did change in that year. We received an incredible number of attention from the press. Documentaries were made, crazy stuff was done with players. They ended up in talk shows and all kind of funny things they did. A lot of coverage in papers and magazines. I do see it was recognized. So for us, that was we didn't have the internet at that time, but on all the magazines and papers, I was buying everything at the time to see what was written and done and watching everything on TV. We weren't used to that. So for sure, it was noted, but a little bit overshadowed by Ajax's success, of course.
I want to circle back to the points tally that season, 54 points. And I repeat, most seasons, any team with that record would have been champions. And it
Mm.
was just their luck that they were against one of the greatest Ajax teams in history. Nevertheless, they stand out for the whole human adventure from where they came from.
Yeah, especially when you also look at the means with which we did it, right? We didn't even get close to any of those top three teams from a budget perspective. Never did we. I mean, might have had a tenth of the budget that Ajax had at the time, and also similar to what PSV Eindhoven, in a lesser extent, Feyenoord would have. So if you put all that together, most of the players we got for free, but just by being able to put together that ideal team combination of quality, character, all the things that you wanted in a team, and that balanced team with a great coach. I think that even sets the whole achievement into the right perspective. It wasn't just two teams having 100 million to spend and then see who ends first. And oh shit, we were not lucky. No, we were a team with like just a fraction of that budget, just with a lot of creativity and great mindset to be able to fight that. So that's what making me very proud of that team and that period of my club's history.
In closing, what is the legacy of this 1994-95 Roda adventure in Dutch football history?
Yeah, I think we were one of the teams who showed that it is actually possible. Later on, a couple of teams repeated it. So smaller teams like Willem II and the second, Heerenveen and the second in those years, and they also qualified for Champions League. Later on, Twente and AZ Alkmaar managed to become champion, which was obviously even a bigger performance. But for me, it showed the whole Dutch football that it actually is possible to get into that top three, which was not deemed possible in that period. I mean, it was always the 1, 2, 3 was Ajax, PSV, Feyenoord, and we managed to do that. I think that is being recognized, and then with a team, with the characteristics of the team, led by Huub Stevens, people remember that.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. All our respective contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So, Maurice, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on football history.
Thank you, Sean. It was great to be able to talk about this period.
Thank you.